Hello and welcome to today's episode of The People's Law. My name is Sarah Mukiseni and I am your host. Now, this is more than just a TV show. It is a program that brings the law out of the courtroom into your living room, where the law meets the people. On this program, you're going to learn about what the law says about different topics and different matters that relate with your life. From rape, defilement, to employment, many topics and a lot to learn. So join me today as we get in space. On today's episode, we are joined by Counsel Chishimba Gabriel Chilekwa, and we will be discussing the Constitution. Counsel, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
We are so happy to have you, and we're excited to learn about the Constitution. So, what is the Constitution, and why is it considered the supreme law of the land?
Well, think about it this way. Human beings live in groups, and every particular group needs a set of rules to govern them. It doesn't matter what it is, a small club, kids on the playground, or even a house. The country is no different. All of us living together need a set of rules. What the Constitution essentially is a collection of our fundamental rules that govern how we live. But also importantly is that it also creates the distinctions of how power is actually utilized, who utilizes that power, and how the people who that power is utilized upon ought to react. So when you look at a constitution, you're basically looking at a set of rules that govern how we will direct our affairs, but also set up the institutions for governance. Hopefully what that does is that it sets the foundation for why this particular law should be the supreme law of the land. In our particular case, our constitution in the country is the supreme law of the land. Number one, because it says so itself. But number two, because it creates a structure in which everything that happens in the country, legally speaking, is subject to this particular document. So that is, in fact, what it is that you're referring to when you speak to why the Constitution is supreme.
Okay.
So I think that would be a nice high-level way of describing it.
Can you take us through the process of constitution making in Zambia since independence? How has that process looked like over the years?
Let me just, again, try and do a high-level kind of discussion there. But the first place to start is that Zambia was under the control of the British, and in 1964 we got our independence. Prior to independence, all of our laws were fundamentally created in a different kind of format, primarily based on the British way of looking at the law. So the body like a parliament making the laws that would rely on. But at the point when we're becoming independent, like most African countries, we then introduced a written constitution. So for the first time, we then had a different kind of document that was our constitution. That was the beginning of our interaction with what is primarily our constitution now. From independence, along the way, we've had particular moments in our history when we have made amendments to our particular constitution. And the first one of those was when we moved away from a multi-party structure to a one-party participatory democracy. What the process looked like was the government of the day, through something called an Inquiries Act, basically said, we need to make these particular changes. Let's ask people to contribute to that particular process. And arising from that process, we then amended our constitution. We've then along the way tried to amend our constitution a number of times before, and perhaps the big change or the big jump would be to when we again changed our constitution to get back into multi-party democracy. And then During that multi-party democracy period, we also then had perhaps our biggest foray into a very public process, something that was called the Monakatwe Constitutional Review Commission, that went all over the country, collected people's views, and then did a report.
Mm-hmm.
After that particular constitutional review finished its work, that report was then adopted, but sadly the government didn't adopt all the particular proposals that they made. We still had changes to that constitution arising from that particular process. Perhaps because we didn't listen as much as we should have, we created a few problems along there that hopefully we might be able to discuss along the way. After the Monakatwe Constitutional Review Commission, we then had two other attempts, including the last one that resulted in what is our current constitution. So you might recall that during President Sata's time, he also set up a body that kind of looked at existing information that had been collected before and tried to utilize that to change the constitution. Of course, President Sata died before that process could be concluded. And under President Edgar Lungu, we then saw the National Constitutional, it was called the NCC, I forget what its full name was, that then ultimately birthed what is our current constitution. The underlying or common thread through all of these is that we've had attempts to have some public participation and then try to generate a document out of there. But I think that if you followed the public discussion, you'll still see that it's still been a bit problematic, notwithstanding that particular route. So again, very high level, but we've had those various ways of trying to get to our current constitution.
So in total, we've had how many attempts at amending the constitution since independence?
I think
and how many successful?
Well, I don't know what success means, but I think that we've successfully made changes at various juncture.
Mm-hmm.
So from a multi-party constitution to a one-party constitution, from that one-party constitution back to a multi-party constitution, and then to a constitution that ultimately had this expansive change from our last constitution to the current one. So if you ask me, I would say that 3 of those have resulted in major changes along that history.
Okay. So what key steps or standards are to be considered when trying to draft or amending the constitution?
Okay. So that's a really interesting question. And I think that up until this month of this year, we didn't really have concrete legal thought around this. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion has always been one that has favored a lot more public interaction. Now, the reason that I've favored that particular route is because a constitution should belong to all the people. If I digress a little bit there, it's to make this particular point. The acts of parliament that we make are effectively made based on the policy objectives of the party in government at a particular time. But the constitution transcends all of that. From when we make it up until the country going on, it continues to just be a document that stands above. So in terms of that public participation, for me, that was an imperative. But that wasn't something that was in the constitution itself. And so for a very long time, the different schools of thought were that we could go out, get these particular views. Ultimately, Parliament could decide what is going to go into the Constitution. But in a very recent case brought before the Constitutional Court ruled that the starting bit has got to be a process that galvanizes public participation, because the Constitution is the people's document. Mm-hmm. And so now I think from that particular Constitutional Court judgment, we have clearly set out a route that says to us, we must go to the people in a very clearly defined fashion. Allow them to speak about what their constitution should look like. And the body that ultimately adopts this may be Parliament or whatever else that the law might provide in the future. But that the starting point has got to be what the people say. And then you can move from there and ultimately, hopefully, get a constitution that stands the test of time, that age-old Zambian construction.
Well, you are still watching The People's Law, and today we're talking about the Constitution, understanding what it is and how it applies to our daily lives. So please stay tuned and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law, and today we're learning about our Constitution, what it is, what it means, what it entails, and how it applies to our everyday life. Now, Council, please help us understand who are the key stakeholders in drafting or amending the Constitution. Is it the government? Is it the people? Or is it the members of Parliament?
Okay. So if we take a step back and just think about the case I was talking about that recently came out of the Constitutional Court, what you will realize is that the court was saying that the people, you, me, ordinary citizens, should be at the center of that particular process. The Constitution itself kind of acknowledges the supremacy of the Constitution because it says we the people have given ourselves this Constitution. Now, in the context of good order, the first stakeholder is the general public. So, ordinary people. But we also need vehicles that allow the views of ordinary people across the breadth of the country to be put together in a way that can be translated into a working document, a working legal document. So, borrowing from what we've done in the past, I would think that we would start from the people. The next step would be a body, could be of experts, so lawyers, other people who are knowledgeable in matters of the Constitution, coming together, collecting those views and packaging them in a format that allows further discussion. After that, the usual process is then to take this to a body like the National Assembly to be able to adopt what it is that has been agreed by the people. In our previous iterations, obviously, the executive, the government as we refer to it sometimes, was front and center in that process. The Constitutional Court has said that the executive still has a role to play, but really it ought to be one that facilitates the people's participation as we move through those particular stages. So all of those and all of us are in fact very important stakeholders in the Constitution because, like I said before, the Constitution is intended to be our document as the people of this country.
So now, even with a good Constitution, implementation can sometimes be a challenge. So what safeguards do you think need to be put in place to ensure that the Constitution is followed at all levels in society, from the minority to government and everyone that the Constitution is supposed to apply to?
Okay. I think that's a good question. One of the things that the Constitution provides for is a separation of function or powers. So on one side, you have the executive or the government as we tend to refer to it. On the other side, you have the legislature, National Assembly, Parliament, that is responsible for making laws. The third arm in that is the judiciary. Now, the judiciary is created to help us resolve our particular disputes. So they are the ones who tell us what the law is, the law ought to be, and ultimately impose particular sanctions, give particular reliefs where that is necessary. So a very important thing that we should have in a space where the Constitution should be followed is an independent judiciary. That means that from the lowest level to the highest level, adjudicators are subject only to the law and not the control direction of any other human being. And this could be fellow judges or the executive or members of parliament, or indeed even members of the public through our kind of pressure exerted on them. But if our constitution is going to survive and deliver on its promise, what is important is that the judiciary is absolutely independent to do its job.
So now, how can ordinary Zambians participate in the constitution-making process, should they have that desire?
Well, that is a slightly difficult question. One of the things that I've hoped we could do personally is get a little more interested as ordinary citizens in not just the Constitution, but all the laws that affect us. Now, based on the process that we adopt for ourselves, what it is that we will find is that there's always going to be room for people to air their views. Let me just go back to a previous process that we had, Bill 10, if we remember that. One of the things that we had in that particular process was that a body was constituted where people could participate, and then it moved from there and went to the National Assembly, and that was another avenue for people to participate. But when you think about what the Constitutional Court has just said, it has said to us that the kind of structure we need to create for ourselves is the kind of structure that allows ordinary people to participate. So it is very likely, in my mind, maybe a commission that goes around the country collecting people's views on all manner of things as that foundational step. And then from there, you get more and more participation. But it's also useful, I think, to remember that we belong to various groups. So people in the media and their particular interests could have bodies that they belong to, utilizing those channels. Lawyers will use the Law Association of Zambia, and various other bodies like that are also avenues. But the point still remains that each particular individual should have an opportunity to speak to their constitution when we're making it or amending it, if we're going to be in a position where we get a constitution that we can all kind of rejoice in as our constitution.
Okay. So for the sake of our viewers, are there any other ways of amending the constitution other than the introduction of bills?
Probably not. So our amendment process, I think, based on the recent judgment, is twofold. One was where we thought that it was just about ultimately introducing a bill. And therefore the different schools of thought that said, look, Parliament was ultimately the body that would deal with this kind of thing. The other was to suggest that we could do this through a process that collected views first and then ended up or culminated in something like a bill ultimately. So I would have to say there probably isn't a precedent that whatever process we go through would ultimately end up in a process of a bill. Because again, remember, the Constitution is a law.
Yeah.
And like all laws, Parliament would ultimately have to have their stamp of approval on it. Perhaps the little last point there is that the only difference is, in this case, what the people would have submitted should, in my view, reign supreme, and Parliament would be adopting that.
Okay. So we're still learning about the Constitution, and there's so much information, so much that we need to know. And obviously, we need to have this information if we are to participate in the constitution-making process or amendment, as it were. You're still watching The People's Law, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law, and on today's episode, we are talking about the Constitution, understanding what it is, what it means to us, the average Zambians, and how we can participate in either its implementation or its amendment. Now, Councillor Gabriel, how accessible is the current Constitution to the average Zambian, both in language and in understanding?
Okay. Again, I think a fantastic question, Sarah. How accessible is the Constitution to the average Zambian? The Constitution is in the language that is our official language primarily. In this country, it is therefore in English.
In English.
That alone presents a slight challenge to how accessible it might be to a great majority of people. I'm not sure what the statistics are, but our literacy levels would obviously play a role in just being able to read and understand the document. But the second thing, and this is probably very important, is to remember that the Constitution is a legal document. And as a legal document, it therefore requires some basic level of understanding of the law. From that perspective, it would be very, very hard for me to suggest that it's an accessible document. If what we then discuss is the idea that it is relatively easy to purchase, from that perspective, I think that there's some level of accessibility that we can speak to. But I think that it is not a very easy document to understand. It is in English, and therefore that presents some level of a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So because of that, then how do you think we can help the average Zambians, the students in schools, the women, the people in rural areas to understand their rights and their responsibilities according to what's in the Constitution? How can we do that?
One of the things that I think that for me has been really, really apparent is that this country tends to only interact with the Constitution when we're going through a process of amendment. Mm-hmm. And at any other time, the only people who will do anything relating to the Constitution are lawyers, the judges that they appear before, and the parties who might have one constitutional issue or another that requires dealing with. So I think that it is critical for us to create a culture that is different. Mm. That if you look at a country like the United States of America, almost every ordinary person has some level of appreciation, particularly of their rights.
Yeah.
That is the kind of thing that we need to get to. Where do we start? I think that schools are a good place to start. Mm-hmm. My first interaction with separation of powers was something learned in social studies in primary school. Mm-hmm. I think that we have subjects like civic education now that allow especially our young children to learn about things like the Constitution, the law, and generally governance. There is a gap there in the sense that once people are out of school, they're no longer interacting with this. And so perhaps we need to be a little more deliberate, maybe through a ministry like the Ministry of Justice, which could put up across programs like this that would help people learn and interact with the law around them a little more. So I think that that's one way. So fantastic program you have for that. Kudos to you and your team.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
hopefully this is something that we begin to see a lot more of across the spectrum, just from your end, but from the government side, perhaps even from the Law Association of Zambia's side. But the only way it happens is if we talk about it.
Absolutely.
And we get people to actually interact with this material.
Absolutely. Now, there's so much to talk about with regards to the Constitution, which we can't exhaust in this particular episode, but would look forward to having you back to just explain a bit more. And we're looking forward to getting questions from you, our viewers, whatever that you need to know, whatever it is that you don't understand. This program is for you to help you understand the laws of Zambia and how they apply to you. Now, coming back to Constitution literacy, obviously there is civic education, but it's not... do you think it exhausts what the Constitution is? In the sense that as much as we may be aware of our rights to a certain extent, we may not be as aware of our responsibilities. So does it exhaust that part of the Constitution? Or do we need to do more in the education system so that people are more aware of their responsibilities?
I will confess I haven't looked at the syllabus, but I would like to think that it does. I think this because I have young children, and when they have spoken about some of these things, it hasn't purely been a focus on their rights. There's also been a discussion around responsibility as well. But I think that there is room for more. I think that we clearly are not a country that is at a space where I would say we have interacted with the law generally, but even more importantly, a law as fundamental as the Constitution, as much as we should, outside those times when we're either amending it or there's a case in court. And even when there's a case in court, remember, it primarily attracts the attention of those who are participating in it and not necessarily the general public. When the courts make a decision, again, the discussions around that tend to be structured in such a way that they're mostly lawyers' discussions. So we do need to do a little more to cascade down some of that information in a way that people can begin to appreciate. For instance, the case that I just spoke about, that's a really good case to get out to people so that they know that, look, this is your document, this is your Constitution, this is an opportunity for you to say, I want to be a part of this process. So I think the summary there, Sarah, is we can do more.
Okay. Now, since we're talking about constitutional literacy, we're going to go to the streets and find out just how much the public knows about the Constitution. We'll be back shortly. What do you know about the Constitution making process or bill amendment?
I will speak as a citizen, I only understand when it comes to constitutional amendment, usually these are bills that goes through the parliament, and there is also a bill, a constitution that has to be approved. In order for it to be approved or to be amended, it has to go through a referendum, and which has to be done with an approval by us citizens in order for it to get back again into parliament to be approved.
But what do you know about the constitution making process or bill amendment process?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Jason, mwene mzapo chani pali process yopanga constitution nangu bill amendment.
Bill and amendment. Bill amendment.
Yeah. Na constitution making hizo hapo cha.
Sinzi wapo vilivyoansi.
Ms. Kambanji, do you know anything about the constitution making process or the bill amendment process?
No, I don't know about it.
Okay, Precious Chikubula, what do you know about the constitution making process or bill amendment? Do you know anything about it?
No, I'm not really sure. I don't know anything.
Okay, Mr. Chisha, what do you know about the constitution making process and bill amendment process?
Okay, thank you so much, madam, though I don't know your name as well. Yeah, thank you. I think the little that I know is constitution making process is not only done by the government. It involves even ordinary Zambians. We need to give out our own views. That's the little that I know.
Welcome back. You are still watching The People's Law. Those were some very interesting views. And, you know, it's quite interesting because we're just talking about constitutional literacy and just hearing what the public has to say, I think leads to the question, how can people access the Constitution so that they can learn more about what it is and what it actually says?
Okay. Clearly what we have is nobody in this country is necessarily responsible for that very important function. I think that all of us operate in a space where each one for himself when it comes to the Constitution. So I think that, like I said before, a starting point is really having very deliberate kind of effort coming out of places like the Ministry of Justice, places like the media, where we can have conversations around this particular thing. I have always thought about something like the Constitution from my grandmother's perspective. And she's almost 100. And I think to myself, whenever we have these discussions, does any of that make sense to her at all? My suspicion is that it doesn't. But that doesn't mean that the Constitution doesn't affect her.
Yeah.
So clearly, a little more deliberate effort from the government side, but also from the other side of the tracks as well, in terms of the kind of programs we put across there.
Yeah.
So maybe lawyers getting a little more active in schools. People might be members of clubs and churches taking the time to speak about the Constitution and the law generally, and programs of that nature, whether formal or informal, might be very, very helpful.
Okay. So now, considering the feedback that we got from our audience and also your analogy of relating the Constitution to your grandmother and her level of understanding, I think it's safe to say that, or maybe you could actually explain what are the consequences of being ignorant of the Constitution, because not knowing what it says or what it is does not exempt anyone from having a responsibility to uphold it. So what are the consequences of being ignorant of the Constitution, what it is, and what it means to us as a people?
I think that when you look at our Constitution, and our definition was very high level, but one of the things that is a part of our Constitution, and is true of most constitutions around the world, is that they also contain the human rights that the citizens of a particular place might, or in fact are entitled to. So in the case of our Constitution, we have something called the Bill of Rights, which spells out the rights that are available to us as citizens of this country. Now, imagine yourself being completely unaware of
What your
your
rights
right
are.
to free speech. You will self-censor, and you will deny yourself the ability to participate in the affairs of your country.
Yeah.
Imagine that you are unaware of your rights, and let's say the police detain you without cause. You are unable to react to that because you are just not in a position to say this is wrong, or at least think about why it is wrong and challenge that particular detention. So from where I stand, ignorance of the Constitution, particularly when it comes to our rights as citizens, is really one of the ways in which, as citizens, we deprive our country of its ability to develop. It is that simple for me, that by failing to stand up and say this is wrong or this is right, we allow our country to just drift off course when it does, and without the ability to correct that particular course.
Okay. So now, how can civil societies, schools, and churches help in constitutional literacy?
Well, I think that it's really, really simple. It's to have very deliberate material. Think about schools, for instance. We have syllabus in civic education. That should probably have a healthy dose of material that relates to the Constitution. Civil society should also have some focus on the advocacy side, not just on the side where we're trying to protest against something that might be happening at a particular time. So civil society, churches, all of us just deliberately thinking about what could we do now to actually teach people about this in our own small ways, could be the way that we get people more enlightened. Yeah.
Okay. So in conclusion, what are your last remarks and your advice to the public with regards to the Constitution?
Okay, so I think that when it comes to the Constitution, the most important thing to remember is that this is our Constitution. It says we the people because it is expected that each and every one of us will see ourselves in that particular document. That means that when we're called upon as citizens to, for instance, participate in a process to amend it, we should rise up to the challenge and do so. When we're called upon as citizens to defend the Constitution, as in fact the Constitution itself requires that we do, we rise up to the challenge and do it. And we do this because it is our Constitution. Thank you.
This discussion has been very enlightening, and I think I want to read the Constitution again. But thank you very much, Council, for coming. We really appreciate the insight, and we look forward to having you again.
No, my absolute pleasure.
Well, there you have it. That is about our Constitution, and I hope it's been as enlightening as it has been to me. If you have any questions, please interact with us on our social pages. Send us your questions. If you need any clarity, we are here to make sure that you know what the Constitution is and what it means to you and to your family. Thank you very much for watching. You've been with me, Sarah Muktaseni, on The People's Law.